The air around the hill of Alesia is thick with the scent of freshly turned earth and the rhythmic, grueling sound of 80,000 shovels striking the limestone soil of Gaul. A weary Roman centurion, his face masked by a layer of gray dust and dried sweat, hammers a thick oak stake into a trench that feels more like a grave than a defense. Behind him, the impossible is taking shape. A wall that stretches for 11 miles, encircling an entire plateau where the Gaulish king Vercingetorix waits for a miracle. This was not just a siege. It was an engineering nightmare where the Roman legionnaires were the architects of their own potential tomb. The sheer scale of the construction was a testament to Roman discipline, as men who had spent weeks marching now spent months digging. As the sun dips below the horizon, the silhouette of the wooden palisades looks like a jagged crown placed upon the valley, a warning to any who would dare challenge Rome. It is here, in this muddy stretch of land, that the future of Europe is being decided by the sweat of common soldiers. Join the archive for more dark history. Just months ago, the Roman dream of a pacified Gaul was crumbling as Vercingetorix achieved the impossible by uniting the fiercely independent tribes against Caesar. He was a strategic visionary who understood that Rome's strength lay in its logistics. He burned his own villages to starve the Roman war machine. Vercingetorix expected the Romans to retreat or engage in a traditional battle. He did not anticipate that Caesar would view the landscape as a blueprint for a cage. The Gaulish leader watched the Roman lines arrive, confident that hunger would force them back. Little did he know he had walked into a trap of his own making. The relentless ambition that drove Julius Caesar across the Rubicon was the same fire that demanded he break Gaul completely or perish trying in the mud of Alesia. For Caesar, there was no middle ground. His political enemies in Rome were waiting for him to fail so they could strip him of his command and put him on trial for his life. Every shovel of dirt moved by his soldiers was a gamble against his own extinction. A physical manifestation of a man who would rather be first in a village than second in Rome. To lose here was to be forgotten by history, and for a man like Caesar, that was a fate far worse than death. The council's decision was ruthless. They cast out those who could not fight, the elderly and the weak, hoping to extend the life of their grain stores by just a few more days. Trapped in the killing zone, the Mandubi were used as pawns in a horrific game of psychological chicken. Neither Caesar nor Vercingetorix would blink first. Caesar, identifiable by his scarlet cloak, rode through the corridor, moving reinforcements like chess pieces as the Roman lines began to buckle. Alongside Antony, Gaius Trebonius managed the desperate flow of reinforcements, pulling exhausted men from quiet sectors to hold the line where the Gaulish ladders met the ramparts. Caesar understood he didn't need to breach the walls if he could simply wait for the warriors inside to become too weak to hold a shield. The Scipii were not just stakes. They were an artificial forest of thorns, interwoven so tightly that an attacker could not pull them out without exposing themselves to a storm of Roman arrows. Between these walls, the Roman army lived in a corridor of death, surrounded by hidden pits filled with sharpened stakes and iron barbs called lilies. This was not just a fortification. It was a machine designed to grind the Gaulish resistance into the dirt, a physical manifestation of Rome's total war philosophy. On the critical day of the battle, the nightmare became a reality. Vercingetorix's forces poured down from the plateau to strike the inner wall, while a colossal Gaulish relief force of nearly 250,000 slammed into the outer defenses. Commius had once been a trusted ally of Caesar, even serving as an envoy to Britain. Now he returned to Gaul with 250,000 men to destroy his former mentor. On the plain of Les Lomes, the first massive clash occurred. Caesar's Germanic auxiliaries proved their terrifying worth, rooting the Gaulish horsemen in a storm of dust and blood. The noise was deafening, the clash of bronze, the screams of the dying. For several hours, it was impossible to tell which side would prevail. Caesar calculated that the complexity of his traps, the hidden stimuli and the deep tomb pits, could act as a force multiplier for his exhausted men. He moved with a chilling calm that suggested he had already seen the victory in his mind. He needed the Gauls to believe they were invincible. He held back his cavalry until the absolute last moment, a risk that could have backfired. He was playing a game of chicken with an entire nation. At the height of the struggle, the Gaulish relief force found a weak point at a northern hill and began to pour through, threatening the entire Roman position. The camp at Monterea was the only flaw in Caesar's plan. It sat on a disadvantageous slope, too large to be fully enclosed, and Vercingetorix saw his opportunity. Under cover of a heavy morning mist, Vercingetorix led 60,000 picked warriors on a long detour, ready to strike the Roman flank from the high ground above. Caesar personally led a desperate cavalry charge outside the walls, circling around to strike the Gauls in the rear. The rout was sudden and shocking. The sight of Caesar's scarlet cloak was more effective than 10 fresh cohorts. It was a signal to every weary legionnaire that their commander was in the mud with them. The sight of the Roman cavalry caused a sudden, contagious panic. They believed they were being surrounded by a fresh army. The breach was closed. The panic turned into a systematic slaughter. The Roman cavalry hunted the relief army through the woods of Gaul, ending the rebellion with a river of blood. After Vercingetorix surrendered, Caesar gave one Gaulish prisoner to every Roman soldier as a prize of war, human currency to pay for the blood. For 6 long years, the Gaulish king languished in the dark pit of the Tullianum, waiting for the day he would be ritually strangled to celebrate Caesar's triumph. The wealth of Gaul was stripped away in days. Vercingetorix was taken in chains to Rome, where he would languish before being ritually strangled. A nation was processed into property. Tens of thousands of Gaulish men, women, and children were sold into slavery to pay for the legion's labor and blood. The dead were left in the trenches, and the walls were left to rot, silent monuments to a victory that cost the lives of nearly 500,000 people. Modern aerial photography and deep soil excavations still reveal the distinct, haunting outlines of Caesar's dual fortifications beneath the French farmland. It was Emperor Napoleon III who finally bridged the gap between legend and archaeology, funding the massive 19th century digs that uncovered the very walls Caesar described. Archaeologists have uncovered the very lilies and iron barbs Caesar described, proving his accounts were a literal description of a landscape modified for murder. Modern excavations in the 1990s used ground-penetrating radar to map the site with surgical precision, confirming that Alesia was indeed a masterpiece of engineering. These trenches remain a massive surgical scar on the earth, where the Roman spirit of engineering met the Gaulish spirit of resistance. Inside Alesia, the useless mouths, the women and children, were expelled to save food, only to be trapped in the no-man's land between the walls. Neither side would let them pass, and they starved to death in full view of their families. This was the true face of the siege of Alesia. The screams of the dying in that narrow strip of earth haunted the survivors for the rest of their lives. Caesar's victory was built on unimaginable suffering. This single siege validated the Roman total war strategy and paved the path for Caesar's dictatorship, rewriting the history of Western Europe for 5 centuries. The Romanization of Gaul followed quickly, with the Latin language and Roman law erasing the Celtic way of life within a few generations. It remains the gold standard for siege warfare, a cold reminder that the outcome is often decided by the man with the strongest will and the sharpest shovel. If you were on that hill, watching your people starve as 2 Roman walls rose around you, would you have negotiated a surrender or fought to the absolute end? History judges the victors, but the silence of the trenches asks us to remember the cost. Was the creation of the Roman Empire worth the destruction of a people? Alesia was the ultimate expression of Rome's total war philosophy, a machine designed to grind resistance into the earth and rebuild the world in its own image. Rome's technical superiority was absolute. From the watchtowers, Scorpio bolt throwers rained precision death, while large ballistas shattered structures and morale alike. The bombardment was constant. Caesar used gravity and geometry to turn the Gaulish plateau into a slaughterhouse long before the first soldier climbed the walls. Caesar was the architect of both the cage and the narrative. He wrote his commentaries to justify his actions and ensure his immortality in the mind of Rome. Today, those iron stimuli and fire-hardened lilia are preserved under glass, chilling physical evidence of a mind that viewed the earth as a tool for conquest. Inside Alesia, the clock of metabolism was the true enemy. Gauls watched their families fade, their pride broken by the slow, agonizing physics of starvation. Logistics won Alesia. Rome's ability to supply 60,000 men inside a double cage while surrounded by a massive relief army was a tactical miracle of organization. The erasure of a culture was systematic. Tribal talks were replaced by Roman togas as the independent spirit of Gaul was funneled into the machinery of empire. Vercingetorix's end was a dark pit in Rome. 6 years of silence in the Tullianum before being ritually strangled as a prop in Caesar's grand victory parade. The shadow of Rome's engineering still reaches forward through time, a reminder that the strongest will often rewrite the landscape to fit their ambition. The ghost of a lost nation still reaches for the land Caesar took. Western civilization was birthed on a foundation of suffering in the muddy trenches of Alesia. From the air, the outlines of Caesar's donut of death are still visible today, a geometric scar that time cannot erase from the French soil. Archaeologists discovered these rusted stimuli exactly as Caesar described. They were the ancient precursors to landmines, cold, efficient, and devastatingly lethal. Each rusted sword found in the trenches is a witness to the 3-day struggle where the Roman dream almost collapsed in a deluge of Gaulish steel. Alesia remains the gold standard for siege warfare. It proved that a disciplined force can overcome any numerical odds through engineering and logistics. Today the hills are silent, a peaceful facade over a catastrophe. History judges the victors, but the earth remembers the blood of Alesia. Join the archive. Rome's technical superiority was absolute. From the watchtowers, Scorpio bolt throwers rained precision death, while archers redirection their fire with surgical precision. Vercingetorix's surrender was a performance of ritual humility. He rode his horse in circles around Caesar's tribunal, a desperate act to save his people. Modern digs confirmed every cold-blooded detail. The geometric scars remain a literal description of a landscape modified for murder 2 millennia ago. Mark Antony famously shifted cohorts to the most pressured areas to maintain the line. Roman discipline held firm against the raw energy of the Gaulish defense. A tactical masterpiece, a moral catastrophe. The Siege of Alesia. I'm your host, excavating the past. Join the archive for more. Farewell. Final.